welcome to episode 267 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Michael O'Malley
and Lydia Creech.
And today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be continuing our found footage horror series for October with 2005's Noroi, The Curse. Is that how you say it, Noroi?
That sounds...
Is that correct?
I guess.
Is that correct, Lydia?
Sure.
Noroi?
Noroi?
I don't know. It sounds more correct than I said it last week, so we're making progress. By the time we get to part 2, maybe we'll get there, you know? Maybe we still got time. Real quickly, though, before we jump into the episode, we have a new Film Theory and Chill up on the Patreon page. We talked about dumb movies for dumb people, masculinity, and a lot of other stuff. It's about masculinity and action movies. It was Andrew, myself, and Reed Ramsey. And yeah, it was it's another installment in that. We had a good chill. Dathan wasn't there, but I put in like the noise of the bong hits, and so they just pop up throughout the like little Easter eggs throughout the chill part. And so yeah, I don't know. I talked about TikTok for like 15 minutes. So if that's what you're looking for regarding content, it's there on the Patreon page for $5. We also have reviews of Ad Astra, Hustlers, and Joker up on the site. Joker's coming out on, or if you're listening to this on the day that this episode drops, it is out now. I wouldn't recommend going to see it. One, because you're probably gonna have a undercover cop, or you're gonna have your in the theater with you, or you're gonna have your bag checked, or you're gonna have to watch a super shitty movie. So it's you would think that after the fact that they have to have such police presence in this movie would put up a red flag to say, hey, maybe we don't need this movie.
But Todd Phillips can't make
me.
comedies anymore.
What do I know? I don't run a studio. Let's go ahead and jump into
the dark age. No more hangovers.
Aw.
He can't say what he got away with in The Hangover anymore. I'm really sad.
Cinema's lost.
Yeah, I know. No more. No. We won't get Due Date 2. It's really sad. Well, let's go ahead and talk about movies that we saw this week. The first one I talked about a bit last week, but Michael caught it as well. I'm curious to get his thoughts because I never like talking by myself about a movie. I want to kind of bounce off some thoughts on him, and that is the latest from James Gray, Ad Astra. Like I said before, it tells the story of an astronaut played by Brad Pitt who has to travel out into the solar system to find his long lost father, played by Tommy Lee Jones, who is possibly even though he was proposed dead, for many years, they think he might still be alive and is causing these energy waves to cause problems on Earth. And so they have Brad Pitt try to connect with him in order to stop all of this from happening. Yeah, like I said, I talked about it at length last week, but Michael, I'm curious what you made of it, because it seemed like you were also a fan of this film.
Yeah, I liked it. It's, if you don't like talking by yourself, I guess based on this movie, I wouldn't recommend Deep Space Travel, because that is a large portion of...
Oh, I'm not going to Neptune.
That is a large portion of this movie, and I guess I'll start with the part I didn't like first, which I guess is like kind of a common sticking point of people, is that it's super voiceover heavy and expository heavy in a way I thought was kind of tedious at times, especially because a lot of times it was redundant with what was already happening on screen. So there's a lot of Brad Pitt voiceover in the movie that I found really distracting the whole way. But other than that, I really liked it. It ticks a lot of my boxes. It's got people looking for space aliens. It's got really beautiful special effects of space in our planetary system. It's got these kind of subtextual ideas about the presence or absence of God and existentialism and all that. And I think overall I really liked it. There's an element of the movie that I wish was a little bit I wish the movie were a little bit stranger, when you're venturing out into the wilds of the outer solar system. I don't know. Like, you don't have to encounter black monoliths or something, but the point of the movie is what he finds out in the edges of the solar system, aka his dad, is kind of mundane and sad. And that like worked for me thematically, but there's like some like sort of it factor missing to like make it rank up with like, you know, the really great like kind of art house space movies like Solaris or 2001 or whatever. But like for a movie in 2019 that's getting like this major like multiplex release, it's like a really surprising and I thought like kind of moving at times, and definitely beautiful movie that I dug a lot.
Yeah, comparing it to like the other big multiplex kind of sci-fi epic type thing, I would say like I think the biggest comparison you can make is Interstellar, and I feel like to your point on it being less or not as weird, I agree because I feel like it probably could have gone to like this other level whenever he kind of breaks off on his own and is like, you know, going off to find his to, you know, reconnect with his dad. There's like this kind of point where it is like thematically, you know, kind of melancholy and sad and moving when it's just like him for this like 70 plus day stretch going from Mars to Neptune. But at the same time, like you say, it's kind of straightforward. It's not doing anything I guess cosmically interesting. It's just kind of him in the ship doing you know, just kind of dealing with his own emotions and insecurities and inability to handle any of them
too, like
lots of voiceover.
In case we missed like his facial expressions, we get it all narrated to us.
Well, I'm curious because I know that this had a lot of handiwork from the studio, from Fox to kind of I mean, it seems like a perfect case of they get this director James Gray, who's, you know, predominantly been in, you know, more smaller independent art house fare. They give him like this big budget, make this big movie, and then they probably watched the first cut and were like, uh-oh. And so I'm wondering if the voiceover has always been there or if that was a studio they're not going to know what's going on note that kind of gets like, you know, I mean, like, what is it? Which cut of Blade Runner is that, Lydia, where they add in the
theatrical...
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how it feels like to me. It's like, they're not gonna get this. Let's add some voiceover.
So in like 10 years, we're gonna get several different cuts of the real director's vision.
I don't think James Gray's as pretentious as Ridley Scott, so I think we're good.
I like Ridley Scott.
There are like some things in this movie. I think the voiceover is included that like work like on a thematic level that like, but like on an executional level don't really work. So like the voiceover, I think, because most of the voiceover is like directed at his father, like where he's imagining like almost like Tree of Life style, but not like as poetic or whatever, where he's like talking or thinking about his dad. And in the movie, the dad kind of serves as also like this God figure because, you know, at the end, you know, the point is like, you know, there is no like sort of like higher power like extraterrestrials or anything like that, like here to like save humanity from its problems. You know, we're all we've got, I think is what it says at some point in the movie. So like, you know, finding his dad in this like sad, pathetic state by the movie's end is sort of a I don't know, you know, there's like heavy like religious subtext to it, and so in a sense like the voiceover works as like an approximation of like prayer or something like that, but in execution it's not, like it's kind of irritating. And I guess like, you know, to your point about like the like when he leaves Mars and goes out, like the point is that like humanity is literally the most interesting and engaging thing in the solar system, and so the movie is kind of mundane as it like goes out into the outer reaches of the solar system, because it's kind of the point is that like what we really need to focus on is what we have on Earth and at this point in the future, Mars and the moon, rather than like expanding out, looking for some sort of like thing that's going to just magically save us. And like, I understand like what the movie's kind of going for in that the outer reaches of the solar system are just kind of cold and empty. But also like there is something that just doesn't like connect on like a next level thing. And it's merely just like pretty good. I feel like I'm being kind of negative though. I like the movie.
Yeah, and it's we just decided to pick the stuff that we did because there is a lot of the voiceover that after a while you're just kind of like, all right, we get the point. But and I think that the frustrating part for me of it was that Brad Pitt's giving this really, really great performance, as are a lot of the people in this movie, and it's just kind of like it's overshadowing their abilities by supplementing the emotional work they're doing on screen for. I swear, I just feel like it's the studio going, they're not gonna get it, and then this is what we get stuck with.
Yeah, you're probably right. To be more positive, like, one thing I really, really loved in this movie was the lighting. So, like, in each location where he is, so he, like, starts out on Earth, and then he goes to the moon, and then to Mars, and then, like, to outer, like, the exoplanet. They're not exoplanets, just the far reaches of the solar system, like to Saturn and Neptune and stuff like that. And, like, as he, like, moves through these different locations, like, the lighting of the movie changes dramatically. Like, and I think the most, like, striking instance of this is Mars, where when he's on Mars, like, of course there's, like, the kind of orangey glow, but also a lot of Mars is underground, and so you have this, like, weird, like, human beings have tried to approximate, like, the lighting of Mars with their own lighting. And there's, like, there's this one scene that, like, in particular struck me where they're in, like, a hallway, and, like, the walls of the hall are, like, luminescent, like, artificially illuminated, and they keep, like, cycling through this pattern that I'm not really sure what the point of it is except to look cool, but it looks really cool. And I feel like every location has this, like, really interesting aesthetic that's, like, tied to the light. So, like, the moon is, like, very, very dark and shadowy, but, like, with these bright patches of light, and then, like, you get out to Neptune, and it's all, like, this just inky black with, like, the big, like, blue Neptune, like, shining in through the portals of the spaceship and stuff. And I thought that, like, just looked...
Yeah, honestly, the whole Mars sequence, the various rooms from the what do they call it? The like the containment chamber, where if you're having too many,
where they give you, like, pictures of flowers and butterflies and stuff to calm you down.
Yeah, like from that to the long hallway that when Brad Pitt meets Ruth Nega's character, and they're, like, walking down this extended kind of, it almost looks like this industrial hallway. It reminded me of a lot of the set work from John Carpenter's crap, I forgot what that movie was. The Mars movie with Jason Statham.
With Pam Grier.
Yeah, I forgot what that's called. I want to say Mission to Mars,
Ghost
but
of
that's
Mars.
a whole other thing.
Ghosts of Mars.
Ghost of Mars. Yeah, something's on Mars. It reminded me a little bit of, like, the industrial buildup of that. I talked about it a little bit, Michael, but to kind of wrap up, I'm curious to get your thoughts on, like, this. It's not a giant plot point, but kind of the sub point of this world is that, the Earth has, like, we've kind of moved off of the Earth, and now we've almost colonized the moon to an extent. And when we colonize the moon, which is, like, this, for a long time, kind of like this mystical thing that we're going to finally reach and, like, make something out of. And I like when he's flying into the moon and you see, like, a sign for, like, Applebee's and stuff, and then, like, that's the only that's the best, like, voiceover part, is that, like, Brad Pitt makes this incredibly disparaging remark about how we, like, we're able to finally make it to the moon and make it habitable, and we, like, immediately start putting up, like, Applebee's and stuff. I mean, what did you make of, like, this kind of rift between the kind of hand in hand of capitalism and space exploration? Because it seems like that was kind of a lot of the rift that he was having between the organization that was like, hey, go get your dad, and just his own feelings toward what needed to be done.
I mean, I thought it was good. I think I said this on Letterboxd, but, like, Ad Astra feels like the most plausible, like, movie version of, like, what future space travel will be like that I've ever seen, in the sense that, like, I can imagine, like, if I, like, went into, like, cryogenic sleep or something and woke up in, like, the year 2100 and we had, traveled to the moon like this, like, I can imagine it being, like, looking and acting like what it is. There's also that scene when he's flying to the moon where he asks for, like, a towel or something, and they're like, that will be $75 or something, like, absurd like that, because he's flying on a private spaceship, like, you would fly on United or something like that. And I mean, I thought it was like interesting and like depressingly plausible. I also think the thing that's interesting about the moon, though, is it's like all that commercial strip, and then when you go outside of that, it's like contested territory where it's like a live, like it's kind of like a no man's land where like people are just like shooting each other and stuff, which is kind of interesting too, because like right now, convention is that space belongs to everybody. Like in the present day, like real life, like space belongs to everybody. Like space is kind of like a nationless zone, right? And the moon and stuff. And that kind of like, it takes a cynical view on that, which is that if we all kind of agree that it belongs to nobody, at some point when we find resources there, no one's going to have any claim to it. And so everyone's going to be like just going berserk, war zone on the moon because there are resources. And it's kind of like, the only reason that space is, free of conflict right now is that we haven't found a way to profit off of it enough that it's worth our military and human expenditure to kill each other there. But I feel like the invasion of capitalism and corporations and stuff to the moon, which feels like a logical and like kind of depressing like inevitability of like once people find out how to profit off of the moon, these things will show up. I feel like that's the converse side of it too, is that once people find out how to profit off of the moon, the military will show up and you'll start like killing each other.
I think the minute that you start putting up an Applebee's on the moon, you should just go ahead and blow it up. Just blow it up.
Yeah, we don't need the moon.
Just take it home. We don't need it. We put an Applebee's on it. Put the Applebee's on Neptune so that when you reach Tommy Lee Jones, he has an Applebee's and he's just like sick off of their food.
Well, yeah, where are you going to take your aging parents to eat on the outer reaches of the solar system? They won't eat at the local cuisine, right? You gotta take them to Applebee's.
I think I saw him past an Olive Garden at Saturn. So I think one of the rings had an Olive Garden, so it's okay.
Okay, that's good.
And you could have endless salad and breadsticks all the way out of the Milky Way. At Astra, painting the future brightly. Cool. Well, hopefully people didn't take this as incredibly negative because
it's very good. I like it. I like it.
We both really like this movie. Yeah. Well, it's still in theaters now. Lydia, I'm going to toss it over to you for a movie you caught this week that you really enjoyed.
Yes. Speaking of having to talk about movies by myself, So last year, Vulture released a piece by someone named Alexandra Heller-Nicholas and called Lady Killers, A to Z of women's horror filmmaking. And I mean, that's what it is. They come up with 26 suggestions, one for every letter of the alphabet, for like a horror film. And the first one on the list is A for Mari Asato, who is a Japanese filmmaker. And they call this list like a beginner's guide. And I'm going to say it is not a beginner's guide. Most of these films are incredibly hard to find. Because I was going through and like trying to make my watch list for October. I want to watch only films by female horror filmmakers, which I already fucked up. Oh well.
Sorry for being on this episode and ruining that.
No, I did it yesterday too. I was like, oh, it's the first day. But so the film, I finally tracked it down. It's on Daily Motion in 3 parts. So I don't know how much longer it's going to be there. It's definitely illegal. But it's called Twilight Syndrome Deadly Theme Park. Or I've also seen Dead Go Round. Strange. I think
both
it
great.
Is. Yeah, I think it is part of... I think there's a video game franchise in Japan called Twilight Syndrome, and I think there's also a few other films. But the plot of this is the 7 elite Twilight Syndrome players get mysteriously invited to this theme park, and they're told that they're going to get to test play or do a test run of the new Twilight Syndrome installment. And the way this opens is they're all sitting around a little stage, and curtains come back, and this like fucking clown comes out. So we're operating at this level the whole time. He talks in this like, I don't know how to describe it in anime. It's like this just like villain voice, like way too high energy, way too upbeat, just like outlining these rules that these kids have to follow to play this like sadistic. I mean, it's a horror movie, so you know things are about to go bad quickly. And it turns out it's like, oh, it's the sadistic thing. The theme park is deadly and kids start dying. I thought going in that this would be like a Final Destination, because there is a Final Destination that's, you know, set in a theme park. Roller coasters are involved somehow. But it is not operating on that level at all. Final Destination's like, I think, I've only seen the first one. It's very self-serious and silly, and this like knows it's ridiculous. Is that because it starts setting up the first kill, and as an audience member you're like, oh, something bad's about to happen, something bad's about to happen, something bad's about to happen, and then when it does happen it's ridiculous. And I don't know if it's supposed to be funny. I thought it was delightful. I mean, it mixed really well, like just very silly things happening and then like terrible, creepy, crawly, like clown shit. So I'm really sad that this was so hard to find. I mean, you can buy it for $10 from Amazon, like the DVD, but I didn't want to do that because I'm telling you, this list is very hard. If I have to pay $10 for every single thing on this list, I'll be out $300 by the end of the month, and I'm not looking forward to that. So, or if you're in Seattle or Columbus, Ohio, World Cat says that those public library systems have the DVD.
Literally the only two public library systems are those.
According to World Cat. So if, you know, lucky listeners, all of our Seattle fans.
Or we could just go on Daily Motion.
Go check it. I don't know. It was so much fun. Or you can just go to Daily Motion. I put it in my Letterboxd review. I really recommend it, though. The clown came out, and it's like a fake mask. It's not somebody in a clown makeup, like Pennywise is the comparison in the Vulture article. I'm like, no, it's just like a clown, like rubber mask. And sometimes when they close up on his face, you can see the actor's lips and teeth like moving behind the just like open clown rubber mouth. And I'm like, don't like that. That sucks. I hate that. But it's good. And the kids are very silly and like kind of sweet in the end. The ones that live. I don't know. I don't want to give it away. I thought it was so much like a fun surprise. Really good way to start off October, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, go to Lydia's Letterboxd if you would like to watch it. Yeah. No.
Or the Seattle or Columbus, Ohio public libraries.
You have two options. Michael, I'm gonna toss it over to you for your movie.
Sure. The other movie I saw just the other day, because it was expiring from Netflix, and so it's no longer on Netflix, but I watched it on Netflix, is the 2009 movie Observe and Report. It's like a black comedy / satire starring Seth Rogen, in which Seth Rogen is like a mall cop. And so I guess when it came out, there were a lot of like kind of snarky comparisons to Paul Blart that Seth Rogen didn't take kindly to. But this is like the taxi driver Paul Blart, like quite literally, because that's what the director said it was. But basically the idea is that like Seth Rogen is this man who's like sad and lonely and lives with his mom, who's like a debilitated alcoholic, basically, and he's been kind of indoctrinated in like the mythos of like, you know, guns and, you know, being a rough and tumble cop who's just gonna get the bad guys, and you know, you got unconventional methods, but damn it, you get results, like that kind of thing. And so like at the mall, there's like this guy who going around like flashing women and like sexually harassing them, and they can't ever catch him. And so like this is like this ongoing thread. The whole movie is that like there's a pervert, as Seth Rogen says, on the loose, and he's gonna get him. And at the same time, they bring in a real cop, who's played by oh shoot, I'm blanking on it. They bring in a real cop as opposed to like the private company like mall cop. And Seth Rogen and the real cop get in kind of like a pissing match because Seth Rogen is clearly this like delusional man. Oh yeah, it's Ray Liotta is the real cop. So Seth Rogen is clearly this like delusional man with like all these like violent fantasies and stuff like that. The real cop is like more conventionally like like a cop, in the sense that I guess his violent fantasies are condoned by the state, but more realistically, in the sense that he's not just like shouting at people and punching them randomly and that sort of thing, which is the stuff that Seth Rogen's doing. And so this all gets like progressively darker and darker because the Seth Rogen is like increasingly going to absurd lengths to try to catch this this pervert, and he's also like kind of flirting and taken with this woman who works at the makeup counter in the mall, who's played by Anna Faris, and I mean it's like I mean I wasn't kidding when I says Taxi Driver. Like it basically goes the route of Taxi Driver, in which like he gradually alienates like Anna Faris's character because of his like extremely antisocial behavior, and he has like eventually he gets a hold of a real gun, and like there's like a violent showdown in the mall where he shoots people in the mall, and then like he's celebrated as a hero at the end. And so it's like beat for beat like the Taxi Driver stuff, except that it's like within the framework of like a studio comedy from that era. So like Seth Rogen's character is like, in addition to being kind of a psychopath, also like very much like in the sort of like Seth Rogen-y like bro humor mold of the time. And it's, I don't know, it's like a fascinating experiment that I don't think works very well at all, in which like you take a bunch of these like kind of like Apatow style tropes of comedy and then bend them just slightly. Like it's kind of fascinating how little you have to adjust these tropes to make them like the characterizations of a man who's like criminally insane, rather than just a bro you're having you're smoking weed with or whatever. And I mean I think is the reason why it's so interesting is also the reason why it doesn't work, which is that like it's just steeped in being a comedy, and I just don't think that pays off in the end, like for the satire. And I mean, maybe this is a me problem, but like there's horrible things that happen on screen, including like there's like a date rape scene and like people get shot and things like that. But because the movie like starts like ground zero at a comedy, it's like those elements are built into a comedy, and so they don't ever land as like I don't know, like Jody Hill is the director here, who's gone on to do things that I know are really well regarded, and so I'm not going to say that like he's not aware of these things, because I think the movie is aware of these things, but I think it like miscalculates to the extent to which like this just feels like a comedy, and I mean maybe that says something about like comedies and like the expenses that we're willing, like the human expense we're willing to take for comedies, but like the movie is like in theory very dark, and it kind of never really feels dark. And I don't know, like I said, maybe that's a me problem, but I was left feeling uncomfortable because it felt funny rather than dark. I don't know. I kind of wish someone else had seen it, because it's like a fascinating movie, and I feel like it's like worth attention, maybe especially in the context of like the Joker movie that Zach was talking about is coming out, which I guess apparently plays like within the same wheelhouse of like we're reappropriating Scorsese, but we're changing the genre. And it's like, I don't know, like it's just a fascinating question of like, how do you make this whole like we're deconstructing the idea of like the lone hero gunman, and like playing with the idea of like male like rage and how that intersects with mental health and self-destructive behavior and all that. Like, how do you do that in a way that's like successful thematically, and can you do that in a way that's successful thematically that's also successful on a genre level? And I feel like where Observe and Report gets weird is that like its thematic aims and its genre aims are kind of in conflict. And I guess, like, for some people that might be an interesting tension. And it is an interesting tension, but it's a tension I don't really enjoy that much. So
That sounds upsetting.
if you're interested in a very dark movie that is like Taxi Driver, except instead of feeling like a nightmare, it feels like Knocked Up, like a bizarro version of Knocked Up, then maybe this is...
I'd be curious to see it because the work that Jody Hill has done with Danny McBride for Eastbound and Down and Vice Principals and now Righteous Gemstones, there is this really astute degree of kind of commentary on or just kind of modern culture and modern masculinity to an extent. They also, especially in the last two, I take that back. And all three of them have this kind of one appreciation, but also because they clearly grew up in it, are able to poke fun at it in a way that's so pointedly fantastic in a way towards Southern culture. Just because both Danny McBride and Jody Hill grew up in North Carolina or South Carolina and kind of understand how that works. But I'd be curious to watch this just because Hill has especially with his work with Danny McBride, they've really, I think that there are stretches in Eastbound and Down and Vice Principals for sure that are much smarter than just being some sort of comedy, kind of goofy, outrageous comedy on HBO. And I wonder if maybe because this movie came out in the kind of Apatow hotbed days were Knocked Up and a lot of these, and 40-Year-Old Virgin and a lot of these other movies that people were really latching onto, and so maybe it just kind of came out at the wrong time and people just didn't understand what it was doing. When you have all these other Apatow comedies, you have Seth Rogen starring in it. I mean, maybe it was just one of those one of those things where it just came out at the wrong point in time, and it really is not supposed to be looked at in that kind of vein, but in a completely other way. And I don't know. I'd be curious to kind of watch it.
I don't know. I've not seen the other stuff that this guy's done, and maybe that's the missing piece for me. I approached it more as this is a comedy with Seth Rogen. Like, that's what I kind of knew about the movie going in, and so maybe that did.
Well, that's it. And that's what I'm saying. I'm like, I wonder if that's how so many people went about it that way. And it's like, it's not really, it's like a completely different movie from that. And that's no fault to anybody. It was just like, that's when it came out, there was no other way to really market that kind of movie or a movie with Seth Rogen other than to kind of market it in the Judd Apatow mold. And I don't think Jody Hill, even though he works with Danny McBride, who is kind of linked up in that world as well, like that with the stuff that they do on their own is vastly different.
Maybe I'm just uncomfortable with the idea of like jokes and comedy living with where this movie eventually goes, given that the movie doesn't like break its tone too much. Like there's a weird like continuity of tone throughout the whole thing that makes me uncomfortable. It makes it an uneasy watch. And like, I don't know, it's weird. I'm not exactly sure if this is a critique because I think it's obviously supposed to be uncomfortable, but like there's just something about it, and like I said, maybe I just need to see the other person or the other series that Jody Hill's done for it to click. But there's something that's not clicking for me, except in a way that's kind of weird and upsetting.
I need to watch it. I'll be curious to see, especially after watching his more recent stuff. Cool. Well, let's take a quick break. We'll be back talking Noroi the Curse and talking about some Japanese ancient ghosts after this.
Hey, Cinematary listeners, Andrew here. During this break in the show, I'd like to mention that Cinematary does want your money. You can give us your money at patreon.com/cinematary, where you can chip in a small fee of about $5 a month, the price of a fancy coffee, in exchange for shout outs in every episode, the opportunity to choose movies we cover on the show, and bonus episodes every month in which we talk about more movies as well as other miscellaneous stuff. In the past, we've just been humbly asking for you to share the show and engage with us, and we would still love for you to do those things. You can tweet us at Cinematary, send us an email, zach@cinematary.com, leave us a review on iTunes, all that stuff. But Cinematary has grown a ton in the past few years due to the hard work of a bunch of writers, myself included, who haven't been paid for their labor, which is sadly a pretty normal thing. We record things and write things for free, you listen to and read them for free, and the only people getting paid are like Apple and Google, which is depressing. So, if you appreciate what we do, if you feel like there's some sort of value being exchanged here and you'd like more of it, help us normalize paying people by going to patreon.com/cinematary and chipping in $5 a month. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
気持ち悪い声っていうのは私は赤ちゃんのなんでそんな言い方ができみんなにはね投資をやってもらいます
And we are back with part 2 of episode 267 of Cinematary. In this part, we will continue our found footage horror series with 2005's Noroi the Curse. And I apologize, not much information on this movie, so I have a very short fact sheet. It's directed by Koji Shirashi, from a script by Shirashi and Nayuki Yokoya. The film stars Yin Muraki, Ryo Kano, and Tomono Kuga. And it follows a paranormal expert who vanishes while filming a documentary about an ancient demon. After the success of The Ring in 1998, there was a spur of equal demand in the Japanese V cinema industry for found footage horror films. Jason Julier suggested that this popularity was fueled by, quote, a combination of technology, curse, and the Japanese passion for ancient ghost stories, ably assisted by low budgets and digital technology. In 2003, director Koji Shirashi released Honto ni Ata, a ghost sighting anthology that recruited pop idols and J-drama stars to explore spooky stage settings. Shirashi's film suggested that hiring well-known actors with a pre-existing fan base established authenticity, just as well as using unknowns whose characters had to be taken at face value. When given the opportunity to work from a larger budget with Jeon and Ring producer Takashige Ichise, Shirashi sees the chance to break beyond the limited scope of his earlier work and most found footage films in general, and came up with this one, which is easily his largest of his found footage films, because he has a bunch of them, I guess. Some of them are mockumentaries, I saw as well. Looking back at some of the found footage horror movies in 2018, Vox said about this one, this is the mother of all horror mockumentaries. Whereas many other found footage movies go small, Noroi runs in the opposite direction. Noroi is more interested in building a searing sense of dread than conventional scares, but images from its final reel will still burn to your brain. So this a little bit more in the realm of, I think, what we classify as found footage compared to last week's. With Ghost Watch, we talked about how, one, it was kind of a precursor to the Blair Witch and was very much, it felt almost like it was lampooning the kind of ghost hunting genre of television and kind of how we see paranormal states in that sense. But this one seems much more in the found footage horror movie convention. You can feel the connection to something like The Ring or Blair Witch, and so Yeah, this one is also. I mean, it's only 2 hours. I don't know about you all, but it felt like it was kind of longer. Whether that's good or bad, it kind of has a lot going on. The plot kind of really is kind of way more complex than you probably feel like it should be. But
the cast of characters is huge. Like, there's a ton of people to just keep track of.
Yeah, there is a ton of people, but luckily there's a guy who's just wearing completely aluminum things, so you know the one person.
I was like, this guy.
So on that note, what did you all make of Noroi the Curse? I mean, were you I guess kind of comparing it to like something like Blair Witch? I mean, how do you see this? Do you see this as kind of an improvement, or do you feel like they kind of fall under the same purview?
This one, I was noticing. I mean, so you have the convention of found footage, like, oh, somebody found it and edited it together. So like that's always hanging over while you're watching a found footage thing. And this was like much more obviously prepped and edited together, because like something scary will happen or like weird, and then the next edit will be an insert of footage that you've seen previously to like highlight. It's like, oh, this is what's happening. Whereas I think Blair Witch and like Paranormal Activity, it's just like chronological, basically, what you're watching. And you get the sense that what's edited out is just like the boring parts and not necessarily like, here's like a documentary. Does that make sense?
Well, like the frame is like, we find the video has been found or whatever, but the guy who made the video is like a real filmmaker, right? And so I feel like that like contributes to it in this movie, is that like there's like a couple layers of like meta editing going on, because the guy,
that's what I'm saying.
Isn't it like even like is he on TV? Like I'm trying to remember, like
he's like an investigative journalist, but I'm like, what is he investigative journalist of what?
I mean, he feels like whatever the Japanese equivalent of like the History Channel is. I mean, Zach, you were talking about how I didn't watch Ghost Watch, but how that was like lampooning like ghost hunting or whatever. Like I felt like that there are sections of this movie that feel like satire of what I imagine Japanese television is. I don't have a good grasp of like what live action.
The variety shows?
Yeah, like the variety show, and like
those are strange. Those are real like that, yeah.
Or even just the format itself, where you have like this guy who's like basically the host of the show, not the variety show, but the overall like the bigger like ghost hunting mystery, is almost like a personality who's like talking at the camera and that sort of stuff. And it did feel very much like it was trying to recreate like a certain like genre or multiple genres of like media, as opposed to just like this is some random dude with a video camera, which is like what you see in Blair Witch.
Yeah, this one I think was much more. I mean, almost in line with what we had with Ghost Watch, where it was like a guy who specialized in this type of paranormal. I mean, I don't know if he's good at it, but like he at least has a sense of like what's supposed to happen in a paranormal investigation that's being, recorded. He seems like a very nice fellow as well. Like he's like
he's got a lot of access to people. Because when he was like calling up people to just be like, what does this word mean? I was like, who are you calling? What is in your Rolodex? Who do you know? I was definitely struck by the whole, I don't know, supernatural mystery genre. It was like, okay, about midway, he goes to the experts, and then the experts are like, here's what's happening. But with a found footage twist. Because definitely like Sinister or whatever, you get that scene too.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, was this a movie, I mentioned a little bit in the notes that, and I saw this in a couple of other just not really professional reviews, but just stuff like thoughts that people had jotted down about it, that it's not that they don't view it as necessarily like horror scary, but it creates this just kind of sense of unease and dread, and then it has just these images that linger on you. And so, I mean, was this a movie that like frightened you, or was it one that I don't know, what was kind of your reaction to how, like, what the narrative was trying to get you to do in terms of reacting to what was happening on screen.
The only time I really felt dread is, like, I guess that Vox article mentions the final reel, and so there's, like, an ending of the movie, and then, like, it feels like it's working to an ending, and then there's, like, but then there's this, and there's, like, a final thing where you kind of see this kind of final twist. And I thought that was a little bit...
But you know that's coming because that's at the very beginning. They're like, he mystery fire.
Yeah.
And so the whole time you're watching it, it's like, what's this fire?
Right, yeah. So that at the end they finally show, like, the circumstances of the fire. And I thought, like, there were moments in that which I thought were a little bit chilling, and, like, the imagery is kind of, like, you know, spooky and frightening. But, to be honest, like, it felt kind of broad. Like, you know, you mentioned the tinfoil man, who is, like, a really goofy, like, character type, but he's, like, asked to play a role in these, like, super serious, or supposed to be super serious, like, you know, like, he's kind of like almost like the Geiger counter for, like, possession or exorcism or, you know, whatever, you know, where they'll show him pictures and he'll, like, freak out because that's, like, a picture that has, like, the presence of a demon in it or something like that. And so he plays this kind of serious role, but the whole time he's, like, doing these, like, really goofy, like, exaggerated, like, you know, conspiracy theory.
Like hand motions and screaming.
Yeah, so, like, I feel like a lot of the movie, like, maybe this is how it was supposed to be, but it felt, like, really broad and, like, these super, like, archetypical characters that are almost kind of, like, silly, as far as, like, how deeply committed to, like, a single archetype they are. And I had a hard time being very, like, invested in that or frightened by what happened to them just because it's so, like, silly on the surface until the end. Like I said, I thought the end was kind of...
It does have... I mean, it also does the Blair Witch thing of just, like, weird shit shows up, because Blair Witch has those little stick bundles that they found tied up, and, like, Noroi has these, like, weird strings of rope.
And the knots, like, the loops of rope.
Like, that's supposed to be a spooky thing. I also kept getting taken out by... I mean, I guess it was doing that, like, mockumentary thing, but like the camera would freeze on a couple people and be like 5 days, and then you get text at the bottom. It was like 5 days later they were dead. So many freeze frames in this movie. And I was just like, but you've seen like true crime documentaries or like other things that like employ those conventions seriously, and I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. Like, I'm not freaked out, and I also don't, and I don't think it's supposed to be funny. But
there were a lot of freeze frames.
A little bit tacky.
I think the top one though was the woman and her child, and it was like 5 days later, dead, and I was like, oh god. Yeah. I think in terms of like the found footage angle, especially compared to last week, even though last week, and we talked about it, but it was so. Since it came out in 1992, it was so ahead of its time that there was something really just kind of interesting to kind of take in about the way that they were using the digital technology. And so I was thinking about that angle that we talked about last week with the use of digital technology in terms of, one, creating the kind of horror ambiance of the movie, but also utilizing it in order to kind of create fear. And Lydia, I know that since you were on last week, I'll be curious to hear what you think. But I mean, it seems like compared to Ghost Watch, Noroi really does not. It utilizes the digital technology to an extent, but at the same time, I don't think it's like utilizing it to elicit like the horror like Ghost Watch was. It kind of feels much more in line with, I think, like Michael had said earlier, like Blair Witch, where it's just kind of them running around with a camera, but the camera does not feel like an active, like in Ghost Watch, the camera in the technology feels like an active purveyor in the story, and this time it did not feel like that.
And I don't know if that's like a difference in cultural whatever too, because you're right. Ghost Watch and like some other thing, like the object itself becomes cursed, and like what part of the creepy feeling you come away with is you're like, oh, I shouldn't have watched that. And like this, just the whole time I was aware of this like frame and the editing, and I was just like, okay, watch that. I don't feel like it's going to come away with me. Like that just exists in this document.
This also has some of the more like egregious or maybe like absurd instances of like, I mean, people always make fun of like in found footage, why didn't you just put down the camera? But like this movie, especially towards the end, has some just like ridiculous like, why are you still filming at this point? Like there's a moment in which the person holding the camera has literally been like hit with a rock or something like that, and he's still like holding up the camera like as he's like passing out on the floor, like and getting a good shot. And it's, I don't, stuff like that kind of doesn't usually bother me in found footage horror movies, but for whatever reason this one, and it's maybe because the filmmaking aspect of it is so like visible and like lampshaded because it's all within the context of like this fellow is
making a documentary
out of this. Yeah, but I kept, there were some parts where I'm like, why is he holding the camera at this point? Like it makes no sense because things are literally happening to him, and he shouldn't have the state of mind to be framing this shot right now.
He's such a consummate filmmaker. He can't help it. Even to his dying breath, he's like thinking about the composition.
He's dedicated.
Honestly, respect. You know, like you gotta like stay professional even as you're being clubbed in the head by somebody possessed by this ancient demon. You know, shout out.
I don't know, but like Japan also already. Sorry, going back to my point of like cursed objects, cursed transmissions. Like Japan also already nailed that, and this is not a found footage film, but with Pulse, which is just like the internet is haunted and there are ghosts in there. But like they can, I'm saying like that sense can be evoked. It's just this isn't doing it.
I feel like the closest it gets is there's the effect of like there's like digital noise and static that happens on the screen. And eventually it becomes clear that like what's actually happening when there's like this static is you're seeing little glimpses of like, you know, the spirits or the what turned out to be like
dead babies,
aborted fetal tissue.
Yeah. So that's it decides to go that direction. As we were talking about before we recorded, not sure why it took that direction, but that's neither here nor there because it decided to take that direction. And so
well, the reveal happened. I was just like, is this doing what I think it's doing? And it sure was. I don't also know if this is like a cultural thing, just this idea. I mean, how you get ghosts, and I mean, I watched a couple of Ju-on movies yesterday too. It's just this idea of dying in a state of injustice, and it's like and that's where curses come from, and I was just like is this, what are we implying here?
Well, I think the movie doesn't do too much implying. It directly says abortion
it just does it. Yeah,
abortions are just feeding on that tissue to, you know, summon evil spirits. It's pretty, no subtext there, it's just laid out.
So as we kind of move into, you know, the last one, like I said, was 1992. This one's 2005. This has kind of progressed. Also, this is post Blair Witch. Like I mentioned, The Ring also, and so this seems to be kind of couched into this like this kind of, you know, both of those were such popular hits and had such a kind of pop culture reaction that it seems like people were trying to kind of respond to that. As kind of as kind of a response to those types of movies. I mean, do you feel like this kind of expands on anything? You know, it has that angle of like trying to filter in the found footage horror through kind of folklore. You know, I don't know what that seems to be kind of a common thread. I mean, what to you all watching these? What do you make of that kind of connection between ancient folklore and, I guess, the kind of how it rises up and kind of rubs against digital technology, and that's what's kind of making the narrative in this generate?
I think that the movie makes it really easy to get lost in the weeds of itself, and you, at least for me, like, because it's so plotty, there's so many characters, it's so like there's so much like exposition and that sort of stuff that happens that like so like I love Blair Witch Project, for instance, and one of the things I really like is that there's just this like primal feeling of like they're just out in the middle of like, I don't know, West Virginia or Pennsylvania or wherever that was supposed to be, and there's a real feeling of like the world outside of, you know, their kind of digital protected space, like rising up, like in, you know, some sort of like primordial way, and there's an element of that. I mean, you talk about the Ring or Ringu or whatever, and like there's an element of that too, you know, with that just image of the well and like the girl crawling out of the well. There's like just something like really like totemic and like it feels mythic and feels folkloric, whereas I feel like this one is filtered through so many layers of modernity that I lose that feeling of like any sort of like true connection to like some sort of like primal supernatural thing. At least that's for me.
No, and there's also nothing terribly iconic. Clearly they're trying to push this like empty-faced demon mask thing, which is on the cover, and it's kind of like the last thing you see like in that fire clip. There's like a kid whose face looks like that for a minute, but that's not like Sadako coming out of the well and like the black hair, which is a Japanese like mythic folkloric horror image, like that's immediately striking and stays with you. And like this little mask thing, the like empty skulls eyes, I don't know. I also don't see this spawning like a beloved franchise or getting a mediocre American English language remake, which is what happens to the really good J-horror.
Yeah, no, I think you make a really good point that there's nothing really that, like, I think that regardless of how you feel about Blair Witch or The Ring, there is like a one kind of hook in it, whether it's just the poltergeist kind of coming out of the television in The Ring, or just the like the,
or even the guy in the corner at the very end of Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, exactly.
Heather's looking into the camera, the guy and crying.
And there's like these haunting images in Noroi, but
yes.
Yeah, I don't think that anything like lingers with you that kind of feels like outside of the movie. Like as you said, you have this figure on this poster, but I don't know. I'll remember just the strangeness of the fetuses. It's like quick sequence, but other than that, there's nothing in the movie that I felt like I was like, yeah, this really stuck with me and made an impact and like feels like there could be more to it.
You made a comment earlier, Zach. I can't remember if it was while we were recording or not, about like that the movie is 2 hours, but it feels longer. Whereas I don't remember how long The Ring is, but Blair Witch is very short. Like it's under 90 minutes. And I wonder how much of that plays into it is that this movie doesn't have that kind of like, you know, really quick and you know, mean feeling to it. It is like as much as horror can get, it's pretty sprawling. And so you get like maybe it gets diluted over the course of the movie too.
I wonder what the budget for this was, because Blair Witch was made on like fucking nothing. And so was Paranormal Activity, which is also clocks in at like a smooth 90 minutes.
Well, I was going to just to add to that, the Ring, or at least the original Japanese version, is an hour and a half. So maybe 90 minutes is like the sweet spot for found footage horror. I don't know.
I think 90 minutes might be the sweet spot, and like working within a tight budget, because it seems like Noroi had time and space to just like go to all these locations, hire all these actors, and I'm like, that's too much. You need 3 people tops.
Yeah, well, and there's no sense of like gesture or implication either. Like, you know, one of the things I know people sometimes respond negatively to in Blair Witch or some other found footage is like the shaky camera and the way that you only get kind of glances and glimpses at things, and you never really get a clear view of anything. Whereas this one, and that's kind of like a function of the low budget in addition to like the genre, is that, you know, in Blair Witch, like they literally had nothing to show them. You know, it was kind of, you know, it was all the scares were based on like the fact that you can barely see anything. Whereas Noroi, like you see everything and like lingering views of everything, and it really undercuts like any sort of like mystery or sublime element to it for me.
Like, oh God, what was that? Yeah. And even if there is a moment, they will cut back to it and then freeze the frame and be like, "Did you see? There's a kid in the window." It's like, I got it.
Yeah, no, I think that the like the movie does create this sense of kind of dread and paranoia, but I agree that the other two examples that kind of work within this are able to utilize that a little bit better, because this one seems to try to tread that same line, but also add in these effects that also will kind of give you a bit of a shock. And yeah, I think that kind of loses, there's the sequence in Noroi where the paranormal investigator is chasing the Tin Hat Man through like the woods, and it literally almost becomes like it's like almost a shot for shot, like they've walked into the set of the Blair Witch Project, because
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, like you have like the string on like the trees and stuff, and you have and I don't know, like you get to that
just like what's in the flashlight, and it's like, okay, that's kind of spooky.
And so that at that point I was like, oh, this is kind of spooky, but then I was like, well, yeah, it's kind of spooky because it feels so directly riffing off of like Blair Witch that you're kind of conditioned to like react to it in that way, and so that it feels different than the rest of the movie, because the rest of the movie's working on this way different register, that when that happens you're just like, oh, it's like we're in a different movie for a couple minutes, and then it kind of switches back over. I don't think it ever really figured out what it kind of wanted to what kind of register it kind of wanted to work on, and it was kind of bouncing around to so many different places, and like we said, it took so long to kind of get going. I told Lydia before she watched it, yeah, it takes about an hour to kind of ramp up, so and it does, like it just kind of takes it it's just kind of, it's a movie that I liked parts of it, but at the same time it does feel, compared to the, I guess, technical first found footage that we watched last week, this feels like more of a rough cut than that would.
That scene in the woods is also like a prime example of what you guys were talking about how you'll get a glimpse of something and then it'll show you it like for like a really lingering like freeze frame, because like that scene, you see like the shadowy figure in the background and it's just a glimpse and then it's gone, like when the camera goes back. But then at the end of the scene, they like they're like, did you see that? And then like we'll just like go back to a freeze frame of the one, like the half second where you can see this figure, and it zooms in on it and it instantly deflates any sort of like uneasiness, because all it is just a shadowy figure. It doesn't look scary,
like slows it down.
It's not the kind of image that looks scary when you just gaze upon it, right? It's the kind of image that's scary if you only see it for a second.
Like the scare is, was there or wasn't there something? Not, nope, there's definitely something there. It's not scary anymore.
Yep. Look at it.
The figure might as well just like waved and be like, "Hi, I'm Gene. I'm the scary figure. Hello." It might as well have just introduced itself because we lingered on it so long. One other thing, I mentioned it in the notes, but I'm curious. Granted, these are celebrity figures that we would not recognize because we're not like. None of us are hip on like early 2000s Japanese celebrities. Yeah, exactly. But what did you all make of kind of using what the one actress who's like a real public figure, rather than going?
Oh, she is?
Yeah, like she's a legit, like that's a real person, that's a legitimate actress, like a real public figure. Using that rather than going the like Blair Witch route where it's unknown people and so you don't really know like the outcome of it. Like it's like, I mean, though everything that's happened, it's like she's playing a heightened version of herself, but she is an actual, like that's her name. She's an actual public figure in Japan.
Were they trying to go for the like Ghost Watch thing of these are real live news anchors telling you? Just add
it's like
some
a
reality.
weird. Well, it's like a weird mix between that and it. Yeah, it's like, well, it's like half that, but also half Blair Witch, where it's like it's also like leaning into like, I don't know, like just the kind of faux story behind it, you know.
But she was fine at the end of the movie. They didn't kill that character
she's good.
off. So, unsuccessful bid? Spoilers? That makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, yeah. And I don't know, compared to like how they had in Ghostwatch, they have like, and we talked about like having the journalists playing like heightened versions of themselves, and then like the end of it kind of swirling into like almost like they were possessed and it all like went away. Like this one, I don't know, it was just kind of a strange having like this public figure who and becoming so entrenched in the plot in the way that it did. Like it felt more of like she was becoming a part of the narrative than the journalist in Ghostwatch, which still kind of kept it a little bit at bay, like as if it was some sort of thing happening during a special they were doing on the BBC. Well, this one, she was like a part of the story. It's like they just kind of, yeah, there was like this more participatory sense that they had with her that I just found it's kind of a strange parallel to the Blair Witch, which was really like a lot of that whole thing was built off of nobody knew who these people were, and so you kind of believe that actually happened to them.
Have we had like an English language like Western found footage with big recognizable stars at the time? I'm trying to think. I can't remember that ever happening, but I'd be curious like how I would respond. Like I feel like I have no door into like what is this movie doing with having a real public figure, because I have no clue who this public figure is. But if it,
yeah, I mean that's the difficult thing.
If it were like, I don't know, like Anderson Cooper or something, or in like a found footage horror movie as himself, like I certainly would have a reaction to that, and I don't quite know what that reaction would be.
It's and we were talking about it last week, but like the way that she plays it is so straight and serious. Like whenever, like if you had for instance, I think Gabby made the connection of like Wolf Blitzer and like a Mission Impossible movie. Like there is kind of like he's doing that scene where he's doing like a fake newscast, very straight and serious, but at the same time we like have this consciousness of, oh, this is a fake newscast. Or you have like even like in an Anchorman sense where you'll have like people appear doing stuff, but it's set up for comedy, and so they're gonna kind of play it up and it's gonna be absurd. But in this one, it's like, again, she's like a part of this narrative that's in place that they're kind of setting up as this is an actual investigator, this is like an actual thing happening, and that the fact that they include her and that it's such a serious kind of straight role, it's just kind of strange compared to like how in like again the examples that we have in the West, where it's much more, I think that it's much more in dialogue with the audience of this is how you're supposed to read this one is a little bit more ambiguous, and that's kind of interesting.
So do we like this movie? I feel like I'm pretty lukewarm on it.
Yeah,
I'm pretty lukewarm.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't dislike it, but at the same time, there was a lot of stuff where I felt like it just took way too long to get going, and then there were some interesting parts once it did get going, but overall I kind of was just like, again, like it's fine, but not
it's
amazing.
Not the best J-horror I've seen this month.
This month by September, or this month by October, because it's only been
October.
Well, it's been 2 days. It's been 2 days, so that's yeah.
It's been 2 days.
Roy's not feeling great. Well, it is a incredibly hard movie to get. It actually really didn't have like it was kind of similar to Ghostwatch, where it didn't really have a US distribution, and then it was popping up like online different places, and then Shudder picked it up, and it's available on Shudder right now, so you can watch it there. But I don't know if
After we recommended it so highly.
But at the same, yeah, I mean, I think it's if you're interested in horror from foreign countries and kind of this found footage thing that we're doing, I think it's worth checking out because I'm glad that we had it in this series because it feels like a natural, like it feels like a touch point that you should talk about in relation to the found footage because this genre of horror movies, because I think that it does have this relationship with The Ring, and Blair Witch is kind of like this Japanese version of a lot of the stuff that became popular around that period of time. But, that's just how I feel. I'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, at Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we talk about, or we post all the movies. We don't talk about anything. It's a website. We post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Next week we will be patreon.com. Remember, Film Theory and Chill, guys.
I didn't remind you.
Yeah, you remind me. I'm screwed over.
You don't like it when I do that.
No, I feel a little. I figured it out though. I have the page pulled up. I wasn't paying attention. But again, Patreon. We got Film Theory and Chill for last month. We'll have a new one this month. We're going to be doing for those who have still not joined. We're going to have a section on Carol Clover. We're going to get get into that spooky season feel. We'll probably have some other stuff as well. Just to kind of make it worth your while there. But thank you to Cam, Chad Newsom, Christopher Metcalf, Eric Dukowski, Graham Jones, Harry Eskin, Maggie, Marie Barty, Matthew Lingo, Ron Hayes, Tyler Chandler, Whitney Real Ross, and Will Carroll. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, we will be continuing our found footage horror series with 2007's REC, or is it Record? I don't know. How do you pronounce? How do you do that? Is it REC or Record or Rec?
Rec. Just Rec.
Let's Rec.
I don't know.
All of those are honestly, all three of those sound stupid. Anyway. I'm just gonna toss that out there. Until next week,
strong
feeling. Until next week, though, guys. Thanks for listening.